The gates are shut, the parking lot sits empty. And the grounds of the Mamohado Children's Center in Lesotho, a facility built specifically to support children living with HIV, have become so neglected and overgrown that locals told The Times it's now mostly used as a wedding venue. That's where we are today. That is the current reality of the charity Prince Harry co-founded 2 decades ago in honor of Princess Diana. Its name, in the local Sesotho language, translates to "forget me not." And if that feels painfully ironic right now, that's because it is. Most outlets covering this story will tell you it began with a boardroom dispute. Others will focus on the accusations surrounding a toxic brand. Some will point to the moment Harry stepped down. They're all missing the real starting point. This story begins on the 12th of April, 2024, at a polo event in Wellington, Florida. And it begins with a Netflix camera crew that had no business being there in the first place. Breaking today, the implosion of the Sussexes. Meghan Markle's Archewell charity scandal and, as always, the lies have finally been exposed. An extraordinary double blow. Here's the connection no one else has made. Harry didn't simply arrive at that Sentebale fundraiser with cameras in tow. He announced beforehand that they would be there. That single decision forced the charity to abandon its original venue because the production crew's requirements altered the logistics, increased costs, and changed the entire setup. Before sponsors began walking away, before any brand reviews, before public disagreements spilled into the open, the charity's own fundraising event had already been compromised because Harry's commercial Netflix arrangement entered the room with him. Then Meghan arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by Serena Williams. And that was the moment a 20-year-old charity supporting HIV-positive children in southern Africa began its decline. Not in a boardroom, not in a legal filing, but inside a tent in Florida, at a polo match, in front of a Netflix camera that never should have been aimed at a children's charity fundraiser. And by the time we reach what Harry did 6 months later when he traveled to Lesotho for the first time in 6 years and chose to go completely alone, you'll understand what that decision may have really been saying. Because I don't believe he went alone by accident, and neither does the timeline. But first, if this type of deep dive is your thing, make sure to subscribe. I'll keep following stories like this and pulling on the loose threads, and I'd love for you to be here when the next one arrives. Now, back to the story. Tom Bower has been writing about the Sussexes since 2022. His book, Revenge, Meghan, Harry, and the War Against the Windsors, reached #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list. I'm grateful to them, firstly because they helped push the book to #1 on Amazon, and secondly because I'm not surprised. For them, any criticism is poisonous and damaging, especially when it comes from me. But I can assure you, it's thoroughly sourced, and it's true. That's the point. Unfortunately, it was true at the time. The Sussex camp's response was telling. They attacked Bower personally. They didn't challenge a single specific allegation. The book sold out twice. But his latest work, Betrayal, is something entirely different. And it's important to understand why, because this distinction matters far more than most people realize. Revenge was about the choices Harry and Meghan made. Betrayal is about the consequences of those choices, the impact on donors, staff members, and children across Africa. There's a major difference between exposing ambition and documenting the people who suffered when that ambition collapsed. The stakes are much higher, far higher. And at the center of this story sits a contradiction you need to keep in mind before anything else. The 19th of January, 2020. Harry delivers his final speech before leaving the United Kingdom. Not at Buckingham Palace, not at an official state event, but at a Sentebale charity dinner, standing before the donors and staff of the organization he founded, in memory of his mother. He calls Sentebale his safe space. He speaks about Diana's legacy. He's emotional, and every indication suggests he means every word. Fast forward 4 years. He brings a Netflix production crew to a Sentebale fundraiser and transforms it into a filming location. Same charity, same mission, same children, different priority. That's not simply rhetorical hypocrisy. It's a documented, date-specific contradiction between what was publicly said and what was later done. And identifying contradictions exactly like that is what Tom Bower has spent 4 decades doing. Whether she's genuinely happy or deeply miserable, whether she understands the difficult future that may await her when the appeal is gone, and people grow tired of the jam, the speeches, the Instagram photos, and all the rest when she eventually becomes something irrelevant and irritating. Now, let's talk about the stakes, because this is no longer gossip. On the 24th of March 2026, Sentebale filed a defamation claim against Prince Harry in London's High Court. The case appears as Sentebale v. the Duke of Sussex and another, a defamation action, filed by the very charity Harry co-founded in memory of Princess Diana, against Harry himself. And the legal costs associated with that case are reportedly being paid from Sentebale's operational budget. Money intended for children living with HIV in Lesotho is being used to fund high court litigation in London. Take a moment to let that sink in. Revelation number 1. The first domino that almost everyone overlooked. The 12th of April 2024. The Royal Salute Polo Challenge. Wellington, Florida. This was a Sentebale fundraiser. 300 guests, corporate sponsors, serious donors, serious money in the room. Then Harry announced that he would be bringing a Netflix camera crew, not to document the charity's work, not to film the programs operating in Lesotho, but to shoot footage for his polo documentary, his commercial streaming project, his deal. Sophie Chandauka, Sentebale's chair and the woman responsible for organizing the entire event, later explained to Sky News what happened next. The production crew's requirements simply didn't fit with the original venue. The charity was forced to change locations altogether. Last-minute planning unraveled. An event designed to raise money for HIV-positive children in southern Africa suddenly had to be reorganized around the production schedule of a Netflix crew. Think about that for a second. The fundraiser was supposed to serve the mission. Instead, the mission ended up serving the fundraiser. That reversal, a children's charity being repurposed into a backdrop for content creation, was the first domino to fall. And until now, almost nobody has called it what it was. Revelation 2. The arrival nobody saw coming. Meghan had informed Sentebale that she would not be attending. That's confirmed. Based on that information, Chandauka planned the entire stage setup, the photo opportunities, the trophy presentation, and guest positioning. Because that's exactly what you do when the co-founder's wife gives you a firm no. Then, on the day of the event, Meghan arrived unexpectedly. And she brought Serena Williams with her. No advance warning, no notice. Chandauka later described the situation with the kind of measured professionalism that somehow makes it hit even harder. We would have been really excited had we known beforehand, but we didn't. As a result, the stage management fell apart. Too many people, too little preparation. The choreography simply didn't work. Then came the moment. The one that has since been viewed hundreds of thousands of times online and continues to spark debate. During the trophy presentation photo, Meghan asked Chandauka, the chair of the charity, the person who had built the event from the ground up, to move her position. "Do you want to come over here?" And Chandauka, displaying what I can only describe as remarkable professional restraint, ducked beneath the trophy to comply. On her own stage, the footage generated negative headlines almost immediately. Afterward, Harry's team reportedly contacted Chandauka, requesting a public statement defending Meghan. A children's HIV charity was essentially being asked to issue a press release clarifying that Meghan had not been rude to the charity's chair. And Chandauka's response, later given on the record to the Financial Times, may be one of the most important moments in this entire story. "I said no. We're not creating a precedent where we become an extension of the Sussex PR machine." That refusal. One principled, professional refusal from a charity leader protecting the mission she had been hired to serve. That appears to be the point Harry could not accept. And what followed is where the story shifts from uncomfortable to genuinely damaging. Revelation 3. The audit that measured the cost. Chandauka commissioned a brand audit. 50 organizations, 50 donors. All asked essentially the same question: would you still be willing to be associated with Sentebale? The results came back. Harry was informed directly. Audi withdrew its sponsorship. A major Japanese philanthropist pulled funding. In a single discussion, Sentebale reportedly lost 23% of its total income. And according to Chandauka, she told Harry directly and face-to-face. "On the record, people don't want to be associated with your Netflix projects, and especially not with Meghan." Harry's response? He compared himself to Johnny Depp. He argued that Depp remained commercially successful despite his legal battles with Amber Heard, and therefore, by the same logic, his own public brand could survive the controversy. Take a moment to sit with that. A conversation about a children's HIV charity losing nearly a quarter of its income, and that was the argument presented. Chandauka rejected it immediately. Her reported response was direct. We need American corporations that want to support your mission, not you personally. They don't want your victimhood. Silence. Then came what happened next. Harry didn't reassess. He didn't change course. Instead, he attempted to remove Sophie Chandauka, the woman who commissioned the audit, the woman who delivered the findings, the woman who told him the truth. He went after the messenger, and he failed. He didn't have enough support to make it happen. I know what you're probably thinking. Yes, it gets worse. Stay with me for another 5 minutes because once we reach the legal section, what happened to the money after that failed attempt changes the entire way this story looks, completely. Things have been deteriorating rapidly for Harry and Meghan. Archewell is, for all practical purposes, a shadow of what it was intended to be. Much of the charitable image surrounding the organization has collapsed, and critics argue that what remains looks increasingly like what they suspected all along, a publicity vehicle rather than a mission-driven enterprise. Revelation 4. The donation that had the opposite effect. Here's a detail that, from the outside, resembles a redemption story, but from the inside, it looks very different. In 2021, Harry donated part of the proceeds from Spare to Sentebale. The figure widely reported was $1.1 million. He presented it as an act of loyalty. Evidence that the charity still mattered deeply to him. A demonstration of commitment. A sign that Sentebale remained one of his priorities. But Tom Bower's account takes a much closer look at what that donation actually meant, because Spare was also the memoir in which Harry publicly attacked the royal family. So when that money arrived in Sentebale's accounts, it sent a message clear, unmistakable, and impossible for donors to ignore. Not to the public. To Sentebale's traditional donor base. The institutional philanthropists. The establishment-aligned supporters who had spent 20 years helping build the charity's funding model. Tom Bower puts it bluntly, making the charity dependent on the book disturbed pro-royalist donors. The donation didn't strengthen Sentebale's position. It accelerated the very donor exodus it was supposed to stop. The $1.1 million Harry framed as an act of loyalty was interpreted by many donors as evidence that Sentebale's identity had become intertwined with the Sussex brand, not the mission, the brand. And when that same brand later went through a 50-organization audit and emerged with serious reputational concerns, those donors had effectively been given their reason to leave years earlier. By Harry? With a donation. The numbers didn't add up then, and they don't add up now. Revelation 5. He returned to Lesotho alone, and nobody asked why. October 2024. Harry travels to Lesotho for the first time in 6 years. He goes without Meghan. Most coverage treated it as a touching homecoming. Harry reconnecting with his roots, returning to his mother's legacy. A full-circle moment. But pause for a second. By October 2024, the brand audit had already been completed. Audi had already withdrawn. The Japanese philanthropist's funding had already disappeared. Nearly a quarter of the charity's income had already vanished. And Harry had already been informed through a survey of 50 organizations that Meghan's association with the brand was viewed as the single greatest reputational risk facing the charity's work in Lesotho. Then he returned, without her. Back in April, Meghan had reportedly declined the polo event and then appeared anyway. But when it came to Lesotho itself, the country the charity exists to serve, she wasn't there. And this is where the story becomes quietly devastating. Chief Koloneko Mokothu, chief whip of Lesotho's Senate and the brother of Sentebale co-founder Prince Harry, later told The Telegraph something remarkable. Meghan has never visited Lesotho, not once. 7 years of marriage. To a man who co-founded a charity there in honor of his mother's connection to Africa, and yet, 0 visits. I'm not adding commentary. That's the chief whip of the Senate speaking about the country at the center of this story. Now hold 2 thoughts in your head at the same time, and more importantly, hold them in the correct order. Because the timeline is everything. First, remember Harry's speech on the 19th of January 2020, a Sentebale charity dinner, his final public address before leaving Britain. He's standing before people who had spent years working alongside him, the donors, the staff, the teams traveling to Lesotho and Botswana to provide HIV support for vulnerable children. And he calls Sentebale his safe space. He talks about Diana, about loss, about a legacy he promised to protect. Nothing about it feels rehearsed. Nothing about it feels forced. He appears to mean every word. Now consider the second piece. Chief Mokothu, the brother of Prince Ciso, a man who knew Harry long before Meghan entered the picture. A man who watched Sentebale evolve from a young prince's response to personal grief into an organization that was making measurable improvements in the lives of children living in one of the world's highest HIV prevalence regions. This is what he told The Telegraph in April 2025. No drama, no grandstanding, no hidden agenda. When Sentebale was launched, I remember his words vividly because he was very strong in saying, "My mother, this place," her passion for Africa. He was a loved figure. Then came the next sentence. But his loss of interest has totally killed the spirit of Sentebale. And then the quietest line in the entire story. The one that keeps resurfacing every time I revisit this timeline. I haven't seen him since he got himself married. That isn't a tabloid source. That isn't a royal commentator. That isn't someone chasing headlines. That's the brother of Sentebale's co-founder, speaking from the very country the organization was built to serve. Saying that, from his perspective, Harry effectively disappeared after Meghan entered his life. Meanwhile, the Mamohado Children's Center still stands in Lesotho. The gates remain locked. The parking lot sits empty. The grounds are overgrown. Villagers told The Times it has become little more than a venue for weddings, and that is the physical reality on the ground. The consequence visible in southern Africa. The children remain in Lesotho. The lawyers remain in London. And the gates remain closed. Now let's talk numbers, because this is where the story stops being emotional and becomes measurable. Sentebale's reserves once stood at approximately $1.5 million. That was the baseline. Within 16 months, by December 2024, those reserves had reportedly fallen to around $27,000 after liabilities. The charity's own reporting acknowledged that the figure was dangerously close to its minimum operating threshold, one difficult quarter away from the crisis. Then came the layoffs. In April 2025, Sentebale issued a redundancy notice obtained by The Times. The wording was cold, direct, final. The charity no longer had sufficient donor funding. It had entered retrenchment. At least 24 employees were lost across Sentebale and its affiliated programs. 4 of the charity's 5 London-based staff members were made redundant. Among them, the global head of finance and compliance. Just one person remained in the London office. The deepest staffing cuts fell on the Africa-facing teams, the largest workforce reduction in the charity's 20-year history. 24 jobs, 1 office, and a charity fighting simply to stay operational. That's what's left. And then comes the legal battle. March 24th, 2026, Sentebale versus Duke of Sussex and another. Part 7 claim, defamation, libel, slander, filed in London's High Court against Harry and former trustee Mark Dyer. According to the charity's own statement, the case seeks restitution following what it describes as a coordinated negative media campaign that caused both operational disruption and reputational damage. Now read Harry's spokesperson's response carefully, because this single statement sits at the center of the entire controversy. It is extraordinary that charitable funds are now being used to pursue legal action against the very people who built and supported the organization for nearly 2 decades, rather than being directed to the communities the charity was created to serve. Think about what that means. Money intended for children living with HIV in Lesotho is now being used to fund high court litigation in London against the very man who helped establish the charity. Even the Charity Commission weighed in. Its language, issued in August 2025, was direct. The ongoing public dispute risked undermining the charity's ability to deliver services to the very people it was created to help. And pay attention to the word they used. Not donors, not trustees, not patrons. Beneficiaries. The children. One final point about Tom Bower. Because accuracy matters. 24 books. 4 decades of reporting. 0 lost libel cases. Mohammed Al-Fayed sued him. The case fell apart when Al-Fayed's own conduct ended up validating Bower's reporting. Robert Maxwell threatened legal action. Maxwell died in 1991, and subsequent investigations confirmed Bower's work in remarkable detail. Conrad Black was the subject of Broken Dreams in 2003. Black was later convicted of fraud. The pattern is not difficult to understand. Bower publishes. The subject attacks him personally. Specific allegations go unanswered. Documents emerge. The reporting is ultimately validated. The Sussex camp described betrayal as a deranged conspiracy. But they did not challenge a single named allegation, not one. That's not a new strategy. It's a familiar pattern repeating itself yet again. And historically, every major figure who attempted it ended up strengthening Bauer's argument rather than weakening it. So where does that leave us? Here's the conclusion. This is not a story about a boardroom dispute. That version of events lets far too many people escape accountability while distracting from the one thing that actually matters. This is a story about a 20-year commitment to children living with HIV in one of the most underserved regions in the world. A commitment established in memory of a mother whose connection to Africa inspired an entire charity. And according to this timeline, that commitment was dismantled piece by documented piece. A Netflix production needed a venue. A charity fundraiser became a filming opportunity. A charity chair was asked to function as part of a lifestyle brand's public relations operation, and she refused. Every step exists on the record. The Netflix cameras that forced a venue change. The unexpected arrival that disrupted the event's carefully planned staging. The brand audit conducted across 50 organizations. The loss of 23% of funding in a single conversation. The failed attempt to remove the person who delivered the findings. The resignations. The redundancy notices stating that the money had run out. The locked gates at the Children's Center. The high court case being funded by the same charity those children once relied upon. And throughout all of this, Meghan has never visited Lesotho, not once. Everything she touches turns to, and as one commentator put it, every creative professional and every deep-pocketed investor knows the same thing. The risk is extraordinary. She's become too toxic to touch. Now return to January 19th, 2020. Harry called Sentebale his safe space. Those were among the final public words he spoke before leaving Britain. Of all the institutions he could have chosen on the night he said goodbye to his country, his role, and his family, he chose that charity. Today, that same charity is pursuing legal action against him in the High Court, using money that was supposed to support children. And the man from Lesotho whose brother helped build Sentebale alongside Harry summed it up in a single sentence. His loss of interest has totally killed the spirit of Sentebale. The charity's name means forget-me-not. So here's the question I want you to think about. And I want your logical answer, not your emotional one. By 2024, Harry had the audit results. 50 organizations, in writing. Sophie Chandauka told him directly that Meghan's name, not the memoir, not the Netflix deal, specifically her name, was viewed as the biggest threat facing the charity and, by extension, the children it served. He had all of that information, and his response was reportedly to attempt to remove the person who delivered it. So here's the question. Was Harry trying to protect Meghan from the truth revealed by that audit? Or was he protecting himself from having to make the choice that truth demanded? Because those are two very different motivations, two very different men. And depending on which answer you believe, it tells you a great deal about the state of this marriage, the decisions that followed, and whether those gates in Lesotho will ever open again. Drop your thoughts below. Because I suspect you've already reached your conclusion.